Good afternoon, or in the case of Amos Yadlin, good evening or good night, wherever you all may be. I'm very pleased that we are doing a virtual seminar. We don't usually do virtual seminars, but perhaps we should do them more often. And certainly we should do them when we have a fantastic new report that's very thought-provoking and controversial at the same time by one of our long-standing and favorite people, and that is Bob Blackwill. So Bob, thank you for joining us today. As many of you know, and I encourage as many of you who would like to turn on your cameras as possible, please do. If you're in a situation where you're in listen-only mode, that's also okay. Bob is a senior fellow, a non-resident senior fellow here at the Belfer Center, has been long affiliated with Belfer and with the Kennedy School, going back to the time when he was a professor here at the Kennedy School. And he is also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and is someone who has consistently done extremely thoughtful work inside and outside of government on some of the largest issues of facing the United States, both as ambassador to India, also working as in senior roles at the National Security Council under George W. Bush and other presidents. I had the pleasure and the honor of working for him. So Bob is a friend, a mentor, a colleague, an inspiration all the way around. And so today we're going to talk about his recent report. And this report is called America Revived, a grand strategy for resolute global leadership. And for those of you, I recognize some of the names of people who joined us just at the end of last semester as Bob was finalizing this report, which if I could ask to be posted in the chat, the link to the report. It is almost, I think, exactly 100 pages. It's a very long a report that is the product of a lot of deep thinking and a lot of conceptual thinking. Bob came and spoke to us in person at Belfer and focused a lot on laying out the competing schools of grand strategy. I'll ask him to touch on that a little bit here, but I hope to spend most of our conversation, at least the first half of this hour with Bob and I in conversation, focusing on his presentation of just what a strategy, a grand strategy of resolute global leadership is. So I'll just say, I think it's a really opportune moment to have a new report on grand strategy and asking the question of what kind of grand strategy the United States should have. So those of us that have studied, or in many cases, I see people on this call who have lived the creation and the execution of grand strategies. We know that the first part of building a grand strategy looks at assessing the international environment. What are the realities out there? And I think that Bob's report makes very clear we're at a point where we have new international priorities, not priorities, new international realities, and that our grand strategy needs to take those into account. And of course, another part of a grand strategy formulation is to think about what are America's own assets, strengths, and its vulnerabilities. And of course, those, I think some of them are enduring on both sides of the ledger, and some of them have changed. And all of this, I think, Bob puts together. And then, the hardest point is what are the ends? What are the ends that this grand strategy is seeking to attain? And in a period of, I don't want to say necessarily unprecedented, but certainly very heightened political polarization, is there an end to this grand strategy that can garner support across the political spectrum? So with that, again, my intention is to have a conversation with Bob for the next 25 minutes or so, and then open it up. And I have no doubt we'll have a lot of things to discuss. So first, Bob, I wondered, for those, we have many students on the call as well, and I began my class on energy and geopolitics and energy and the energy transition this week. And I asked people, what is a grand strategy? Maybe I'll just ask you very briefly to say, do you think that I characterized it correctly? Or, would you like to set the stage a little differently for how we should be thinking about just what role a grand strategy plays?
Well, let me first say thank you for having me. And I see many good friends out there, their uh, pictures, and I wish I could be there to say hello to all of them and have a schnapps afterwards, but that'll have to be on another occasion. Um, Grand strategy, and of course, it's a very complicated, long subject and goes back to arguably Thucydides. But uh, I think one way to put it is how does a nation use its many resources in an encompassing way to make itself safe in a dangerous world? And using all of the instruments of hard power, soft power, reputation, trust, and all the rest to try to reach its objectives and counter the threats against it. And there's a long discussion of this in the report, but I would put it like that, Megan.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And as I mentioned, your report lays out five kind of competing schools of U.S. grand strategy, and I'll just mention them: primacy, liberal internationalism, restraint, American nationalism, and Trumpism. And I'd say in each case, you kind of explain the core idea and, what are the strengths of this approach and what are the weaknesses. And you find that all five of these approaches would seem not up to the moment. And so ultimately, you recommend something that's more of a fusion of them. But I wondered if you could just tell us why the two that you ultimately take from most generously in your grand strategy of resolve are primacy and liberal internationalism. And why have each of those like failed to meet the challenges of this particular moment in time? Why do you think that neither of those strategies are really workable in this day and age?
I will be epigrammatic, and all of you please permit me to be so in the context of the brevity we have. Primacy, I argue in the report, is a strategic approach, a grand strategy, which has only had any relevance in the United States in the brief period between the end of the Soviet Union and the rise of Chinese power. And it depends on no peer competitor. And we obviously have a major peer competitor. It was called the unipolar moment or what have you, but I want to stress it had never been present in American history before. And I don't see in our lifetimes, probably, there could be convulsions and so forth, but I don't see a likelihood that we'll ever see it again. So I dismissed that, except for its strong emphasis on a preeminent, dominating American military. So that's what I took primarily from the primacy school. On liberal internationalism, I'm a big fan of liberal internationalism. I argue in the report it was the grand strategy of American presidents from the end of World War II until Trump and American nationalism, which then evolved in the second term into Trumpism, which I believe is quite different, although has some similarities to American nationalism. And I can go into great detail, but I think the problem with liberal internationalism was not its principles, but its application. And I think in the last 15 years or so, it became ever more limp in its applications. and is one of the three reasons I think that the international system and its institutions and practices and policies weakened was because of the increasing limpness of liberal internationalism. The other two reasons, I think, were the rise of Chinese power and its comprehensive and determined effort to undermine liberal internationalism and American national interests and power and influence in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. So that was number two. And number three, and I'm sure we're going to get to this, was President Trump's influence on international affairs, and especially on liberal internationalism.
Sure. And before we get to some of the other components and how you bring this together for your own formulation of this new grand strategy or strategic approach, I'm struck by, in reading the different constructs, there is far less focus on economics. And when I think about Trumpism today, one of the pieces that I find to be the most consistent is something that looks like mercantilism, really. It's just this equation of national power with economic power, and the use of economic tools to advance national security interests. Like, do you see that mercantilism is a part of the Trumpism grand strategy that you describe and I would point out dismiss, or do you find that to be an important component, the economic piece of the different grand strategies that you examined?
No, it's unique, along with American nationalism, in its mercantilism, and different from the other schools. And the reason, and we'll get to this when we get to my fusion, but the reason that I think liberal internationalism stopped competing with it was the decision on the part of an administration not to proceed with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, to step back from it, so that today the U.S. really has no international trading policy of any particular consequence in either Europe or the Indo-Pacific. And the liberal internationalists left an open field to Donald Trump, who filled it. And I think he filled it in a very negative way. And that has to be one of the objectives of rectifying it. But if I could just do a transition here briefly, because I think it's so fundamental. And I'm very interested in what the thoughtful colleagues who are viewing this also have to say about this. The headlines, of course, divert us from long-term trends, but I'd like to make just a few points, just one-liners. One, as we think about the period ahead, we should not forget that the United States remains the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, with the largest economy, with the most formidable military, and with the broadest and deepest diplomatic reach. So there is an enormous amount for an American president to work with. And I only stress that because there are what I call multilateral or multipolar pessimists who forget how powerful the United States is. There's a recent book that is called First Among Equals. Well, who are the other equals? China aspires, but who are the other equals? So we remain enormously powerful. The second is I would just again caution. Of course, world order, as the viewers all know, is never static. It is always evolving. And states are getting stronger, and states are getting weaker, and states are seizing opportunities and making mistakes, and so forth. So phrases like "world order is dead" or "world order -1" are just silly. So that's the second point. And then the third is, and it's one that I've been thinking about a lot since the report went to press about a month ago, which is I very much would like to hear our colleagues speak to, which is how broken is world order now? How beyond repair? How beyond repair? Because the Canadian Prime Minister at Davos made an argument that we're not in transition. And as I said, world order is always in transition. World order has been ruptured. And I wonder, first of all, whether we've gone beyond transition now in the current situation. Also, just perhaps humorously, I looked up on the Mayo Clinic rupture, and just for amusement's sake, ruptures heal in about 6 months. So I don't think that's what the Canadian Prime Minister meant. And then finally, about that, I would just say, and I know there were rapturous applause at Davos. He's been praised for that courageous speech. It was a speech given to a New York Yankee audience in Yankee Stadium. So I wouldn't call it courageous. But how broken is the system? And as we think ahead, Megan, and all of you, what is beyond repair? Because my own view is that I can find nothing that is beyond repair. But you all may find other things that are beyond repair. There's certainly many things that need repair, but I don't see anything that, with the right policies over time by an American president, cannot be repaired.
I love that note of optimism. And I also have never heard the words Mayo Clinic rupture and humorous in the same sentence. So leave that to you, Bob. So let me touch on that. And obviously we'll want to talk about that, how beyond repair is, the order as it stands. And I think it's very interesting that part of the liberal internationalism, the limpness you talk about, has to do with the failure of developing and maintaining an economic agenda, which I think is a really interesting insight, if I understood you correctly. But the idea that nothing is beyond repair and that you don't see anything that can't be repaired seems to presume that Trumpism is a moment in time, right? It's we're at a blip that relates to a particular charismatic political leader, but that there will be some reversion to a more normal political leadership and a more normal cadence of American politics. Like, what if that's not the case? Or, are we right in presuming that that's one of the core assumptions behind your argument, like that this can all be repaired?
I think that Trump is an absolutely unique figure in American history, and he's not going to be replicated. And therefore, what are the challenges to liberal internationalism going forward? I don't think that it's Trumpism in its manifestations, and I can go through all those if you wish, if we have time, in one sentence each. But I do think American nationalism will be likely a challenge to liberal internationalism. And just to remind, that's essentially an argument that says that what matters to the United States, in the terms I mentioned earlier, is the Western Hemisphere, the borders, and international trade and tariffs. And after all, that was U.S. grand strategy for well over 100 years, beginning at independence. And it's been part of the Trump policies, and it will be a legacy. But I think the challenge will be from that direction and not from the deeply idiosyncratic Trump policies. For example, I'll just do one. American nationalism is built on a perception of American values. And the President Trump trumpets the fact that his policies are not based on any moral framework. They're simply what he decides is best. And as I say, that's unique in American history, and I don't expect it to go on. Americans are too idealistic and committed to American values to go on with that beyond Trump, in my view.
Interesting. So I'm just because I'm committed to only asking you questions for 6 more minutes and then opening it up. um, so on the maybe you should say a few more words about your hybrid grand strategy and just how the combination, if you want to say anything more than taking the preeminent US military and then adding that to the liberal internationalism. But maybe you could also address why you think this new hybrid won't repeat some of the mistakes of the liberal internationalism of the last several decades, kind of in the post-Cold War era. And remember that I'm someone who graduated college at the beginning of the whole American primacy. So I thought that was normal. You say it's this historical aberration, but it took me a while to figure that out. So why why will its resuscitation or its enhancement not not fall foul to the same challenges of the last several decades?
Well, it could, and it will make mistakes. That's part of the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no grand strategy that I know of that over time doesn't make serious mistakes. But I would like to point out, just for context, and this is a context that the Canadian Prime Minister missed, the enormous contribution to world stability and humankind of the liberal internationalist agenda. After all, it stopped the use of any more nuclear weapons. It minimized the spread of nuclear weapons. It created alliances and international institutions. It helped make hundreds of millions of people more prosperous and reduced famine dramatically. It reduced world famines and so forth dramatically. And not to leave it out, it won the Cold War. So the accomplishments of liberal internationalism are stunning in any historical sense. And we can all know the mistakes it made. So one can, and I can tick them off, I will very quickly in just 1 second, list objectives and so forth. And if an administration, a liberal internationalist president were to adopt them, then at least we would know what direction we're going in. And then it would depend, as always, on the quality of the president, the quality of the people, and so forth. But I want to start with this one because this pillar, as I call them in the report, of my approach to the next era is to preserve and protect the American constitutional order. And that is my most important of these pillars. And then it's maintain American military superiority, revitalize and reform the rules based world order. I don't think it's dead, as I said before. Of course, prevent the use and spread of weapons of mass destruction, stave off China's hegemonic objectives, which we did a very poor job of doing in this last 15 years before Trump and during Trump. Intensify diplomacy with China to avoid war over Taiwan, increase diplomatic and economic engagement in the Western Hemisphere, defend vigorously human rights around the world without the use of military force, except to avert genocide, which is very rare in the world. And then finally, treat climate change as a profound global threat. Now, those, if they became the pillars of American foreign policy, would all have to be reinvigorated and applied skillfully. But I think they would be the basis of returning to a stable and positive world order in which America could thrive.
Great. I'm tempted to ask you, what is the political coalition imaginable that would adopt that set of things right now? But instead, because I only have one more very quick question to ask you before opening it up, let me ask about the China implications of the grand strategy of Resolute leadership. I think you could easily read it as suggesting that you're advocating for containing China. And I wanted to for you to react to that. Do you think that this is an explicit strategy of containment of China, or is it something else? I mean, you're acknowledging China is a peer competitor. So not a near peer, but a peer competitor, but still advocating for technological restraints and forward defense and those kinds of tools. So give us your sense if that's a fair characterization of where you're going on the China piece.
Well, again, it's discussed at length in the report. I will then be incendiary and say, yes, I favor containing China. And by that, I mean containing China's efforts to undermine America and its alliance system and its values in the Indo-Pacific and around the world every day. And so I wish to contain that. I don't wish to contain prosperity for the ordinary Chinese citizen. I have no interest in regime change in China from generated externally. But I do believe that we have not contained China in the last 20 years since the mid 2010s. And they have taken advantage of that. And that has to be a central plank. However, we also need to intensify our interaction with them because being a Kissingerian, and I miss him every day, I'm very worried about the downward spiral toward war and with China over Taiwan. Incidentally, there is a box at the end of the report which seeks to apply all these schools to a dozen contemporary issues. And the box says that my world order would contain China and defend Taiwan. And I don't believe that President Trump has in mind containing China. I don't believe that his behavior indicates that. And with respect to defending Taiwan, it has a question mark about it. So that's how I feel about containment, the thumbnail version of it, although, as I say, it's discussed at length in the report.
Great. Thank you, Bob. So let's open it up. Please just raise your hand, or if you're on screen, you can wave to me. Nice to see so many old friends. Al, nice to see you. John, Carl, I get to see on a regular basis. Liz, I also get to see on a regular basis. And Amos, I see over video on a regular basis. But so many people I'd like to bring into the conversation. Who would like to kick us off? Okay. I saw Liz's hand go up first and then Carl. Liz.
I'm happy to defer to Carl, who taught me much about actually the question I want to ask. Robert Blackwill, you brought me to the State Department in 1983 to work for you in the Schultz State Department. You taught me a lot about managing alliances. And you have said that you think nothing is beyond repair in what has been done. And I want to ask you how you see that playing out, because what we have done, perhaps most consequentially internationally, is to rupture the trust with our allies. How could that be repaired, in your view, given that you think nothing is beyond repair?
I take a historic view of this. And the rupture that the Canadian Prime Minister was speaking about was triggered, as was the conversation at Davos, not by something President Trump did with respect to Greenland, but something President Trump said he would consider doing about Greenland. And that excited the 3,000 notables at Davos. Well, perhaps, and I see others out there who lived through this, perhaps I'm over historicizing here by remembering 1968 and millions of Americans and millions of others around the world protesting Vietnam, where virtually nobody in the world by Tet agreed with us. And it drove an American president, as we know, out of office. But 5 years later, we had largely regained the trust of the Europeans, and off we went. The same was true during the early years of the Reagan administration, and I could go on and on. So we've had these crises before. Lee Kuan Yew, Graham Allison and I wrote a book on Lee Kuan Yew, and he said two things. One, you've never dealt, you Americans, with a country like China, and you're going to have a very hard time doing it because it isn't like any other country that you've ever dealt with. But he also said foreigners make the greatest mistake in underestimating American resiliency. And we are just enormously resilient. I used to say to European audiences, if I may stop with this, Europeans don't solve problems that they tried to solve a generation ago because they tried and failed. We Americans, to solve problems that we tried and failed to resolve 5 years ago because we don't remember we tried it. We're resilient, and it takes leadership, takes presidential leadership. But I think we've done it many times before, many times before. And I think we're fully capable of doing it again, but it's hardly inevitable. And I do recognize we are at the beginning of the second of 4 years of the Trump administration. And I should say this, I do not expect him to change. I think that what we have seen in the first year of his second term is who he is and who he will be throughout his second term. So it is going to be more difficult. And Liz, I think you imply this in 3 or more years than it is now. But I remain optimistic, perhaps again, having too much of the image of a young John Kennedy going to Europe and persuading the Europeans over the next year or two he wasn't too young to be president. That and then brilliantly handling the Cuban Missile Crisis. That there is in our country of 340 million people a human being, a Homo sapien, who can accomplish that with the support of the American people.
Great. Thank you, Bob.
And may I just say one
Sure.
thing in response, Bob? I hear you. I think the circumstances of the examples you gave historically were so different in that we were united around a core threat in the Atlantic Alliance, and that was the glue that held us together despite Vietnam and Suez and multiple other crises, even all the way through the Iraq War. We were still able to rally our allies. That glue is gone. And so there the question is, what holds us together when we take punitive actions against our closest allies and cozy up to those who have been seen to be adversaries of those allies, including
Well,
us. So,
Liz, can I just chime in? I don't think the glue is gone. It's certainly weaker, but personally, I lived through the bitter arguments with the German government and Willy Brandt about Ostpolitik.
mhm.
And I remember the debates. Part of it is I've spent a lot of time in government over these decades about the deployment of the Glickums and cruise missiles to Europe and so forth. The alliances got, and how about 1963 and de Gaulle throwing NATO out of Paris and so forth. So we've seen this. Every circumstance is different. I don't want to overdo the applied history, but we've come through a lot of scrapes, if I may say, in the past, and we have the ability to come through it. I'm not predicting we're going to come through it, but I think we have the resiliency as a people, and our NATO allies need us. The reason that the Canadian Prime Minister could make that defiant speech is because Canada is the only member of the North Atlantic Alliance who is automatically under the American security umbrella. So he can make that speech. I commend instead to the viewers the speech of the German Chancellor, which I think was a much better speech, although nobody jumped to their feet in delirium.
Thanks, Bob.
Great. Thanks. So, Carl, over to you. And you're on mute, Carl.
Bob, I basically share your inherently optimistic thesis. History destroys things, but history also rebuilds things. When you think of what happened in the American-European relationship since World War II, phenomenal. But when I talk to the Europeans these days, particularly in the last phase now with Greenland, they think that despite all the crises, and you mentioned quite a few of them, and we know them, some of them were really very virulent. This one is different. An American president has never threatened an ally this way to take military action against an ally. So the qualitative change of that really has deeply affected the trust. Many Europeans, particularly, let's say, in the north of Europe, Germans definitely, would like you to be right, that it can all be repaired. But at the same time, they are taking a hedging strategy faute de mieux. They don't know. He could really do it, they would argue. And I think there are really three changes. The one is the qualitative change, because this has never happened before. Secondly, we have to keep in mind that domestic politics is unfortunately changing in a parallel way in the major countries. And that has not happened before to this extent. You know, you have the MAGA movement here with the Trumpism as in its foreign policy dimension. You have Farage in Britain. You have the Rassemblement in France. You have the AfD in Germany. All three supported by MAGAs. I remind you of the vice president's speech in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. So that's there. On the other hand, Putin, while probably enjoying all of this, in other ways helps, because the war goes on relentlessly. The cruelty and brutality of that behavior is a daily reminder to the Europeans. And as Rutte said, stop dreaming. The Europeans need the Americans. Mm-hmm. So that is a powerful force. So how do we end up and take this concoction and produce what you advocate, namely repair the relationship?
Well, I agree with everything you said, Carl, and it's so good to see you. Liz and I could go into a room for an hour and write the speech. And one of the things the speech would say by the new Liberal International president is, I can assure you no American president is ever going to threaten an American ally again. And so forth. And that will have to be said, because one of the things we haven't put enough emphasis on, although Liz and you imply it, trust has to be rebuilt. And but it can be rebuilt. It can be rebuilt in human relationships, in family relationships. It's difficult and it takes time, but it be done. But one issue, and we haven't really talked about President Trump's policies, and he has had some successes, but I'm most worried after 1 year of his effect on extended deterrence. Because it's, as we all know, entirely built on trust. And Charles de Gaulle said, you Europeans would be foolish to rely on that trust. And I worry that Trump is unleashing, especially in Japan and South Korea, but not only there, such an assault on American trust that will be extremely hard to reassert. Extended deterrence as a proposition, given that Trump doesn't believe in alliances and really doesn't believe in any kind of collective defense, then that is, I fear, after a year of it, is going to be the hardest to reestablish. But one thing, Carl, you can blame us for many things, but please don't blame us for domestic European political development. Okay. And by the way, even so, I can say my grandfather on the farm used to say, yeah, that's true, but there are some bad situations a feller can make worse. And we are making it worse.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I wanted to ask Bayer Surin, who asked a good question in the chat, if she would come on screen or at least unmute herself and ask that question verbally.
Hello, Mr. Blackwill. So among the pillars you outlined, which one is the non-negotiable, the core one? And I'm from Mongolia, so for the smaller powers, what does grand strategy mean? Because, we cannot shape the system, we can only survive within it.
Well, I challenge the premise, and I'm not going to narrow down my propositions, my pillars. I know that it's difficult for all of us to keep our mind on the subject for more than a minute away from our phones, but I don't. I only have 10, so I'm going to keep my 10. But I did want to challenge your premise because every nation uh, wishes to survive in the world safer than less safe. And I think every competent government has a grand strategy to try to make that more rather than less likely. As you point out, some nations have less instruments to do so. But that doesn't mean that with other nations they cannot influence the major powers, and they need not be helpless. And I think we've just seen an example with respect to Greenland that a small country, a NATO ally, found a way through its diplomacy and its actions to make the president of the United States, the most powerful nation on earth, to step back. And I would just say, and again, this is the subject of debate and worth many hours of discussion. I think that between now and the end of his term, the international community perhaps is learning that complying with President Trump's demands is not the best way to deal with him. And that leaves a vast panoply of possible countervailing actions. But it's seldom true that bowing to the powerful makes them more restrained, I believe.
Thank you, Bob. I do think that was one of the clear suggestions from the Greenland kerfuffle. It was the first time that Europe really suggested it was going to push back on this, and that perhaps that was a key to the back down. I have John Deutsch and then Al Carnesale. John.
Well, I want
Two
to be
wise men.
Two wise men.
I don't know. I don't know about Al Carnesale, but I want to say, Bob, thank you very much. You really gave a coherent speech here today, and I really subscribe to it. I want to say, first of all, you did not mention technology. Now, I'm not speaking about technology as an automatic move from somebody at MIT. I'm saying that it affects, in my judgment, the changes are so substantial that the entire effort of trying to say what you mean by maintaining military power has completely changed. And the vast, strong armadas that we have of, let's say, carrier-based air is now threatened by a whole new part of technology. And the costs and the efforts to maintain, but to make relevant our technology posture is really a significant additional challenge that we face. And so I want to ask you, when you go through your list of what needs to be done, it's not only to maintain our military, it's to reshape it to meet the real technology changes that have happened. But once again, thank you so much for your presence here. I must say, you look excellent. I kind of resent that also. You look so good. And, you can't say that about Carnesale. So thank you so much.
John, you only have
Thanks,
30
John.
minutes to develop that theme. Of course, I agree with you, and uh, perhaps in that, absolutely. Uh, and the transformation of the U.S. military is absolutely crucial, and so forth. And it is, again, perhaps indicative that President Trump has the most enthusiasm for the battleship since the Japanese imperial staff in the 1930s. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Excellent. Okay. Al, great to see you.
To see you. I don't want to spend my time correcting John, so I'll just get directly to my question. It's about repairing the damage that's been done by Trump, Bob. It was an excellent presentation. He's got 3 more years. I'd be less optimistic if I realized we're going to have 3 more years of this for several reasons. First of all, those allies are looking for alternatives. So it's not just a matter of getting them to believe us again. We've got to undo some of the things that they're already doing. You mentioned the problems in the Far East. Proliferation is more likely than ever because extended deterrence has always been kind of a nutty idea that somehow we make it work. But if it's severely weakened, Japan, South Korea, I don't know about Europe, may feel, well, Trump will be gone, but I'm not sure the next person will be so different that everything will be okay. And finally, I would say all of these things are repairable if things were no worse than they are now, and if I had an infinite amount of time. But I don't believe either of those is the case. So I'm substantially less optimistic than you appear to be, which is unusual for both of us.
Well, great to see you, Al. And I guess I would put it like this, which is it's going to be more difficult, obviously, at the end of Trump's second term than today. And we should be on the lookout for instances when something is irreparably broken, cannot be repaired. But if I could use my experience with Mother India as an example, and I think Carl made the same point about the Europeans. We have the most serious crisis in U.S. India relations since the transformation of the relationship in the early 2000s. However, Indians, Henry Kissinger always found the Indian government the most realist government that he'd ever encountered. The Indians are realists, and they need the United States to balance China. And no matter how much Trump imitates Modi's voice, or how many percentage of tariffs he increases in a tweet at 2 a.m., that isn't going to change. Now we can squander it. We can certainly squander it. But today, Trump announced a budget deal, a trade deal, between the United States and India. And so Europe needs us to balance Russian power. And more it will be also to balance Chinese power. The Indo-Pacific needs us to balance China's power. And so we will have that as a platform on which to pursue smart policies. We're not beginning from zero, and I don't believe that'll be erased unless, and I'll stop here on a very pessimistic note, unless you think, Al, that by the end of Trump's second term, that appeasement will be so widespread in the Indo-Pacific that it cannot be resurrected. And that could happen. That could happen. But that would require, again, remembering Ed Meese, not what he says after he watches television 12 hours a day, but what he actually does. For example, if he were to begin to withdraw substantial numbers of troops from Japan or from South Korea, then he's giving them the incentives to make different arrangements in their fundamental strategic policies. So we just have to be aware that that's a danger. Others would be more expert than I in answering this question, though. But I know there are many in the Belfer family who could answer it much better than I. And it is this: do we think in the next 3 years that there will be greater constraints on Trump's freedom of action, fewer constraints, or about the same? And I'm hopeful there'll be greater constraints on his action, including through the courts.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. It would be a great poll everywhere question. I do want to get Maureen's last question in before we go. Maureen Page is the Associate Director of Belfer's Changing Global Order program. And she came to us this past fall after 22 years in the DIA. Maureen, over to you for the last question for Bob.
Great. Thank you, Megan. And thank you for that warm reception. I apologize. I'm just in transit. So, but I know last time, that we saw you, we talked a lot about middle powers and the prospect of middle powers leadership. We've also talked about adversary alignment and sort of this notion of Russia, China, and Iran, and North Korea, pardon me, growing partnerships. Where do you look in terms of those partnerships, those growing bonds that you think are most crucial to how the world order will continue to evolve and shape over the next 3 years, and the traction that those partnerships have to either complicate or constrain potential sort of U.S. efforts? Over. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. First of all, I think we are headed for a bipolar world that will have very many similarities to the one that we got used to for half a century, a little less than half a century. And that middle level powers will maneuver around that bipolar world the way they did on the Western side, at least, and in the developing world during the first iteration of it. Second, Richard Fontaine and I wrote a book a year and a half ago on the pivot. And in there, we argued, and then we wrote another long, whatever it was, 15, 20,000 piece on the unlimited partnership between China and Russia. I think that that's now a permanent fixture in the international system. It isn't going to change. We're not going to be able to wean Russia away from China. Indeed, I think Russia is on a path to be a satellite of China's. So we have to deal with that. The biggest change, and I would say only two fundamental changes in the way this evolution has occurred. One is the behavior of this idiosyncratic American president, But the second, and this is homage to Amos and Netanyahu and the IDF, a dramatic weakening of Iranian power. And one of the Trump accomplishments, I believe, was bombing the three nuclear facilities in Iran. And the IDF, through its military actions against Hamas, against Hezbollah, against Iran, has changed the configuration of the strategic architecture of the Middle East. And we didn't do that, but thank goodness Trump took advantage of it.
Great. And on that note, Bob, I want to first thank you for your optimism. Second, thank you for spending this hour with us. And thirdly, thank you for such an interesting, timely, and provocative piece. For those of you that have not yet read it, I encourage you to read it. There are lots of good elements of it that we haven't had a chance to discuss in this time, but I think we've gotten a sense of Bob's characteristic strategic thinking, and it's great to bring this group together. So thank you all, and please all come and spend some time in person with us at Belfer anytime you can. Thank you.
And thank you, Megan, and thanks to all my buddies who have been generous in accepting my eccentricities over the decades. Bye-bye, everybody.
And beyond. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.